a gentle invitation to the cloistered past. Welcome, dear listener. Let the world around you soften. Light, the light dims, and the day's noise recedes like a tide, slipping away into the quiet edges of the evening. Settle in, let your body find stillness, and allow your mind to drift gently, not forward, but backward. Tonight, we return to the cloisters, to the cool, stoned passageways and hushed prayer halls of the medieval monastery, a place of solemn vows and worn sandals, of candlelight and parchment, where the rhythm of the days was governed not by whim or market bell, but by the monastic hours matins lord's prime. ... This is not a tale of war or kings or glory, but, as you will see or perhaps merely sense, before slipping into sleep, the life of a medieval monk, though peaceful from the outside, was far from idyllic within. No, it is the quieter, cloistered history, the patient, repetitive lives of those who removed themselves from the world in search of something beyond it. We begin, as always, by stepping gently into the shoes of the everyday. A day in the life. The cloistered rhythm. Imagine yourself awakening not to the alarm of a phone, but to the low, haunting toll of a bell, its echoes folding into the chill of You rise not from a soft mattress, but from a wooden board, laid with straw or thin woollior, sleeping area separated from your brothers by no more than a curtain or partition, if even that. You are in the dormitory of a Benedictine monastery in England. It is sometime in the 13th century. Outside, the world remains dark and quiet. Within these stone walls, it is even quieter. Voices are not yet welcome. Then, the day's structured rhythm begins in earnest. You dress in silence. A simple linen tunic, coarse and clean, a scapular draped over your shoulders, and finally your hood. The cold nips at your fingers as you pull your belt tight and move with the others shoulder to shoulder, yet alone in thought award. The first service of the day is matins. It begins well before sunrise and may stretch for over an hour. Your task may vary. One day you might mend robes. Another, you might assist in the infirmary. A great many hours will be spent reading, copying, or contemplating text when books were still precious, and every letter mattered. The only sounds are of quiet movement and turning pages. The chants are soft, slow, and repetitive Latin, verses passed down for generations. You do not sing for beauty. You sing for discipline, for obedience, for the ordering of your inner life. By this time, you are weary in the way one becomes tired, not from exertion, but from constancy, from days without deviation. After matins and lords, there is time for rest or private prayer before prime work. It is not the labor of the plough or forge. Though some brothers may indeed be assigned to tend sheep, maintain gardens, or copy, the scriptorium is cold and dim, lit by small high windows, or the flicker of candlelight, yet somehow deeply your quill scratches rhythmically across the parchment. The scent of ink, faintly metallic and musty, mingles with the smell of tallow and old vellum. Meals are taken in silence. The refectory is long and narrow. Stone floors echo with footfalls as the brothers file in. A single monk reads aloud from scripture or the rule of Saint Benedict, while the others eat slowly with downcast eyes. You are served simple, fair barley bread, leeks, perhaps a bit of salted fish or cheese, water or weak ale in moderation. There is no speaking, only chewing, swallowing, and the voice of scripture. And so the hours pass punctuated by bells and prayer. Terce, sext, none. Evening falls. Vespers arrive. Then compline, the final office. Sleep comes early. It must, for you will rise again well before the sun. The rhythm is unbroken. That is its power, and its burden. Even small joys like tending the herb garden, glimpsing a wren in the hedges, or warming your hands near the kitchen hearth are fleeting. This life is not one of comfort nor adventure. It is one of surrender, of repetition, of quiet. And it is in that quiet where both peace and struggle take root. Biography event, the life of Brother Atheric of Glastonbury. Let us now turn our gaze from the collective to the individual. Imagine, if you will, a man named a name old and thick with Saxon root, though our brother Atheric lived during the early 12th century. Long after the Norman conquest had begun to smooth the edges of such names, he was not a saint, nor a scholar of renown. His name does not appear in great histories, but in a surviving fragment of monastery record from Glastonbury Abbey, it is written that Brother Atheric served in the infirmary for over 30 years, and from that sliver of parchment we will gently rebuild the outline of a life lived not loudly, but deliberately. Live entered by vow. Like many younger sons, his prospects were few. Inheritance was for elder brothers. Land was scarce, and the world outside the Shire was uncertain and turbulent. There, beneath towering arcades of stone and the watchful eyes of elder monks, he learned his letters, Latin first not fluently, but functionally. Then the Psalms, memorized by candlelight. Then how to bow when to kneel, how to speak, ... and more often, how not to. Atheric was born the son of a weaver in a small Somerset villager, child of modest means and unrecorded birth. Sometimes it was an offering, sometimes it was survival. It was not uncommon in those days for families to send a child orphan, the quiet one, the bookish one, or simply the surplus one to a monastery. At the age of 13, Atheric entered the monastic school attached to Glastonbury Abbey. In his 15th year, he made his vow, a vow of poverty. His voice was not poor, but not strong. Here, brothers, too old, too weak, or too frail were brought to rest and recovery, more often to decline slowly under Atheric's watch. Instead, He became an he brings water steeped with crushed herbs meadow sweet, for fever, horehound for cough, poppy syrup for pain. He adjusts a wool blanket, tucks it at the feet of a shivering brother. Plea. He speaks rarely, but his presence comforts. His silence is not absency, it is care, a vow of chastity. And perhaps most trying of all, a vow of obedience. Not trembling with emotion, but steady measured like the tide. He speaks not to comfort himself, but to mark the passage of another life from this world to whatever lies beyond. He was no longer the son of a weaver. His handwriting, once neat if unspectacular, grows uneven in the infirmary ledger. Eventually, another brother begins to write in his place. He was now brother, and the rhythm of his life would follow the rule of Saint Benedict. That laid out how a monk should eat, sleep, speak, and pray. D. Infirmarian's gentle struggles. Ethelric did not become a scribe or cantor. Which his hands, though careful, were not steady enough for fine lettering. It was quiet work, but constant. The monastery's infirmary, like a medieval hospital, was a long stone hall, lined with pallets. Imagine him there, moving with slow purpose between the rows of beds. Sometimes, when the bells are distant and the chapel is hushed, he reads aloud from scripture to the dying. His voice is soft. He is not a healer. He cannot save. But he is there, and he is faithful, year after year, winter after winter. The rhythm of it becomes its own kind of faith. Acquire, decline, as the decades passed. Brother Othelric's name appears less often in the monastery records. A life of service, a life of quiet obedience, a life that did not change the world but held up one small corner of it. There is no mention of when he fell ill himself, no date recorded for when he ceased his duty, but in the obit roll kept by monks to remember the passing of their own, there is a brief line on the 4th day of the feast of St. Michael. Brother Ethelric of the infirmary went to the law. He served with humility. No great eulogy, no ornate tomb, just a name, a date, and a simple truth. He served with humility. The echo of the ordinary, and now, as you lie still, and the hum of modern life fades, consider what it means to live a life unnoticed by history. Ethelric will never be in textbooks, but someone, centuries later, still reads his name aloud. You, now, in that way, his vow continued. Be forgotten privies and broken clay pipes of the medieval poor. As the stars faded above the silent abbey and brother Ethelric folded his hands in prayer, elsewhere far from cloisters and scriptoria another world of medieval life unfolded. A world unrecorded, unremembered by name, yet woven into the very earth beneath our modern cities. This segment invites you to listen beneath the silence of centuries, to crouch beside the archaeologist's trowel, to sift through ashes and soil and clay, and reconstruct the forgotten rhythms of the everyday. a privy pit in York. The year is 2021. In a quiet corner of York, England, a backhoe pauses in a city redevelopment lot. Beneath the rubble of modern pipes and concrete slabs, a layer of dark soil emerges. Within it, fragments, twisted bone, broken tiles, bits of rusted iron, and then a telltale sign. The remains of a medieval. The air is thick with damp earth and quiet anticipation. From the trench comes not revulsion, but reverence. Here, among discarded things, are the traces of daily survival. Yes, a latrine, a communal privy pit, crude stone walls built to contain waste, but also quite a. Imagine yourself beside the archaeologist. A chicken bone not from a feast, but a small domestic bird, gnawed to its limit. A child's wooden toy, warped by centuries of damp, and tucked in a corner, a clay pipe, its stem snapped clean. Bones and bowls, broken things. In this single pit, buried beneath layers of clay and ash, our story. A cracked ceramic bowl, roughly thrown, used until it broke, then discarded. These are not treasures in the usual sense. They are not gold, nor scroll, nor relic. But to the patient archaeologist, they are infinitely precious. From these fragments, we learn what the poor ate not, the pheasant and lampreys of nobles, but onions, barley porridge, sometimes a bit of dried fish. We learn that clay pipes long, thought to be a post-medieval pleasure, existed in early forms, even in the 14th century, often shared among workers, passed hand to hand, blur. And we see evidence of disease not through skeletons, but in the coprolites, or fossilized waste, which reveal parasite eggs. Intestinal worms were common. A copper dress pin tells us someone once tried to look nice, even if the wool was coarse and faded. Pewter brooch shaped like a cross lost, not buried, tells us someone held on to faith. Bare presence tells us what written records did not, that suffering was ordinary and largely silent. The absence of names. There is something haunting about this kind of excavation. We do not know whose waste this was, whose toys, whose meals, whose pipe. There are no signatures, no inscriptions. Such a color was not for the very poor, but not for the elite either. Perhaps a shopkeeper's wife, perhaps someone trying to look respectable at Sunday Mass. Yet the traces are intimate, and the occasional comfort of a smoke or a toy. A half-chewed olive pit suggests someone tried imported food, maybe once. Each artifact is a whisper, and together they murmur the story of those who were not recorded. Of these, fewer than 1% left behind any physical remain. Beware for patchwork of cloth and clay into anonymity. Elsewhere, in other digs in Norwich, in Chester, in rural villages no longer, on maps more remnant surface, their clothing reused until ragged. When they died, they were buried in common graves, often unmarked. Textile impressions in mud bricks, soapstone spindle whirls from women's cottages, worn leather soles from children's shoes. In London, Archaeologists once uncovered a midden heap in old garbage pyland, found a tattered scrap of wool, dyed with madder root, once a vibrant red. But if you close your eyes and listen past the hum of electricity, you might hear the quiet clatter of a dropped pewter spoon, the creak of a wooden door, a child's distant laugh, rustle of wool skirts along a muddy lane. These material ghosts give us insight into what was valuable: warmth, food, a bit of cloth, a clean bowl, faith, the mystery of the missing million. Before, for every archaeological dig that uncovers traces of medieval life, there are countless more that vanish without record. Consider this: England's medieval population may have been over 5 million at its peak, before the Black Death. So what of the others? Their homes were built from daub and thatch. Their possessions were wood and bone. Be dissolve into the soil, into the stones reused in newer walls. And yet their lives mattered, and still do. Beneath the city, the echoes now. Imagine walking a modern street. Underneath the shops and buses and office blocks lie layers of lives. A city upon a city. You may not hear it, and the silence that followed when those lives passed on, and their names were forgotten, except now by you. Contrasting daily life, the gilded silence of the medieval elite as the sun faded over the wattle huts and muddy yards of the peasantry. They cast long shadows across stone halls where the powerful resided. There, in castles perched on crags and manors nestled in green valleys, life was markedly different, not free of hardship, but veiled in a kind of structured luxury, toward a life measured not by hunger or mud, but by silence, etiquette, and the careful management of status, where the harsh edges of survival were softened by wealth, ritual, and hierarchy. This final chapter shifts your gaze, see. Let us begin in a great hall. The sound of power. Torches sputter against the stone walls, casting long golden shadows. Beneath your feet, the floor is strewn with fresh rushes, often sweetened with dry herbs like lavender or chamomile, to mask the scent of the hearth smoke and those within the room. A harp in the background, its player chosen as much for discretion as for skill. Imagine yourself standing in the center of a 13th century English manor hall. They do not shout, plead. They barely raise their voices. The ceilings are timbered, dark with age and smoke. It was a performance of rank. There is sound, yes, but it is controlled. The low murmur of courtiers, the scrape of trenchers on wooden tables, and presiding over it all, the lord and lady of the manor. You receive coarse bread stew, maybe some dried fruit, but as your eyes drift upward, you notice what is served to the lord's table. They do not need to. Even the salt cellar vessel for precious seasoning was placed only near the most honored guests. Their presence carries weight, like the carved stone above the arched windows. To sit below it, was to wait and to watch. Meals of status. Mealtime in the world of the elite was not merely about food. Imagine yourself as a guest Lorankin, perhaps a minor cleric or a visiting knight. Noble daughters, though rarely schooled, like their brothers were, often taught to read, to sew, to manage estates. You sit far from the head table. She reads from a prayer book, its pages illuminated with blue and red ink. Taxi. The clatter of laborers echoes faintly, but inside all is hushed. For many lords, education was not just for wisdom, it was for display. To own books was to own time, labor, and access. Roasted fowl, perhaps, a swan or peacock, with feathers reattached for display. A rich pottage of almonds and saffron, its golden hue signaling delicate wafers and honey, wine diluted with water from silver pitchers. You may smell the same meat, but you do not taste it. Meals were tiered experiences, reflecting the ladder of power. To be seated above the salt was to be respected. The luxury of education among the nobility, especially in later medieval centuries. Education became a mark of class. Young sons might be sent to monasteries or tutored at home. Conversations were hushed, governed by propriety and layers of ritual. Imagine a girl of 15 seated beside a narrow window in a manor tower. The book was likely written by hand. Perhaps her name is tucked in the margins. It may have taken a scribe a year to complete. Knowledge was not yet democratized. It was precious, curated, and guarded. Silk, stone, and silence, the materials that defined elite medieval life, were quiet. A wealthy merchant might host a feast grander than that of a minor lord, not gilded in the modern sense of glitz or dazzle, but rich in texture and presence. Buhl cloaks, dyed deep, indigo so costly to produce that only the wealthiest could afford them. Stone fireplaces so large they could roast entire animals. Tapestries, hand-woven over years, muffling sound and warming walls. And there was silence, not of emptiness, but of containment. A noble woman's chambers were often still. Servants padded quietly, glancing downward. Letters arrived in sealed rolls. To be elite was, in many ways, to be enclosed from cold, from dirt, from noise. Contrasts and contradictions, and yet the divisions were not as clean as we often imagine. Nobles fell into ruin. Poor children rose to the church or the guild. The lies of class, though rigid, were not unbreakable. Still, in the daily rhythm of medieval life, the contrast between rich and poor echoed in every meal, every garment, every silence. As you return now in thought to the slum alleyways, the chimney soot, the crowded tenement slit, this contrast settles softly in your mind. Be peasant and the noble each lived in the same century, yet in worlds almost unrecognizable to one another. Gentle conclusion. The quiet footsteps behind us. History does not whisper, only in parchment and page. It murmurs in the ash of forgotten hearths, in the frayed hem of a linen tunic, in the glint of candlelight on a stone floor once walked by those who bore titles and those who bore burdens. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let your breath slow like the rhythm of their days. Let the heaviness of wool and the creak of timber lull your mind into stillness. The slums have fallen silent. The halls are dark. The hearths have gone cold. But their footsteps remain echoing softly beneath your own. Good night.